Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Linking the Chain. I'm Chris Scantlebury, the co-founder of ProConvey, and today we're going to be diving into one of those topics that sits right at the heart of conveyancing. I hear a lot of complaints about this, and that's source of funds compliance, and specifically the evolving landscape around source of funds. It seems to be an area that's tightening, the scrutiny is increasing, and frankly, a lot of firms are still running processes that were built for a different era. And today I'm joined by Mike Ward, the founder and executive chairman of Armalytix, a company that's become the go-to source of funds for AML solutions across the industry. And I think, Mike, I read Armalytix now powers transactions at firms responsible for 1 in 7 transactions in the UK, which is pretty remarkable reach. So, Mike, really great to have you on.
Lovely to see you, Chris, and thanks for inviting me on.
No problem at all. No problem. So before we get into the actual compliance landscape, would you mind giving us a little bit of context around your background and where you came from? Because it came from a different world, it seems.
Yeah, I did, although maybe it's converging now. So yeah, I was 25 years in banking, and I guess specifically not even retail banking. I was in something called markets. I worked for the equity divisions of firms like Nomura, which is a Japanese bank, and then Bank of America, where it's from probably is described in the name, Merrill Lynch and Deutsche Bank. And I guess in those places, they were probably in the forefront of how AML was changing, I guess. And within it, we saw the amount of manual work and paper which goes back and forth within some of these AML checks. And often, despite the bank's good intentions, bad actors did arrive. So with the advent of open banking back in, 2015, I saw an opportunity saying, well, hang on, could we digitize some of this process? And would open banking provide the key to unlocking and changing what is often described as a time-consuming manual and often frustrating process? So we created the firm Armalytix back in 2019 to go and help address this issue.
Understood. Yeah. And we'll get into the open banking a little bit later. And, that's part of the changing landscape. But you mentioned a few things there that Armalytix does and what you kind of have done since you've left the investment banking. But for anybody who hasn't come across Armalytix yet, how would you describe what they do?
So we're a data intelligence firm. We use things like open banking. We also use other data, and we help firms collect, verify, and analyze client financial information. Most known in the legal space for our source of funds. We also do some other things, affordability, and some other things within the insolvency sector. But source of funds is our sort of key product. We also offer ID checks, particularly safe harbor checks for property firms, and we also bundle those into packages. I think the key differential for us is really focus on how do you get this process done front to back, and what documents do you need, how much money is involved, how do I truly understand someone's financial picture, and then get the bank data in order to sort of back that up and analyze it and risk flag it. We've begun to work across all parties to property transactions. Previously, we were really known in the conveyancing sector, but as we'll come on to, things are changing a little now. So we're finding we have a more broad case use across agents, brokers, lenders, and the conveyancers.
And I think it's very relevant what you said about having that trying to get everything up front as soon as possible. Obviously, that's our whole MO, what we're trying to do at ProConvey. And I've seen your platform, and it's guiding them through not just answering the questions, right? If you do answer that question, this is what you'll need, and this is potentially where you could get it from, right? And I think that it goes a long way for the clients who are typically selling 1 or 2 properties in their whole life, and don't understand how this works. And especially some of the more complicated source of funds, right? Where it could be a pension or some crypto winnings or anything like that. They really need advice and guidance on where to get that and what is actually necessary, right? So before we get into the substance of a little bit of the changing landscape, for a conveyancer and an agent who's been in the industry a while, and obviously that was myself, but when I was at my firms doing it, that we weren't really using open banking a lot. It was just coming in just before I left. So we were still asking for bank statements and reviewing them manually. And usually, if I'm being honest, it was at least another follow-up to ask for more information, but sometimes 2 or 3, right? So what has changed since then? That was about, I would say, 7 years ago I left. What compliance has changed? And it feels like it's more demanding than it's ever been.
Yeah, I think there's probably two angles. There's what's changed from a regulatory standpoint and what technology is available at that. So I guess from a regulatory standpoint, it's sort of all kicked off with a more formal and not to say prescriptive, but certainly more um, detailed guidance on what was expected of you via the LSEG guidance, which was drafted in 21 and then sort of approved in 2022, which set a more detailed explanation of what you as a legal profession was expected to do under your AML obligations. And for those people who are regulated by the SRA and CLC, you'll have felt that. And so it's not only specific gifts around the source of funds for the home buyer, but also for the gifters. So on our data now, about 32% of any house purchase involves at least one gift. Yeah. And so when you look at it, on average house transaction now, there are 2.4 source of funds checks per house purchase now. So that gives you a sense of how many more gifters there are. You've got joint purchasers, which we all know and understand, but in actual fact, there's a lot of family members contributing to that house purchase were made. If I think about what else is going on from a regulatory standpoint, clearly we've got the prospect of the FCA arriving to ML supervision for the professional services sector, which will include, of course, the legal sector, and that will change and raise the bar. I think then from a technology standpoint, I guess, as you will know better than anyone, Chris, there's changes in what's going on in technology and the tools and what's available. That has also transformed over the last 7-8 years. We've talked briefly about open banking being one of those areas, and that's clearly the start of a great source of funds check.
Yeah.
You've also got the advancements in statement scanning and the ability to understand statements even from quite poorly drafted PDFs. And then you've got these sort of dynamic questionnaires and the advances in how you can use machine learning, which I'm of the age where machine learning is still a thing. We could call it AI, but machine learning is slightly different. And combining those all together, you can come up with some pretty comprehensive solutions now to what can be a thorny and growing problem. And why is that? And why are we seeing it bleed into other property parties, not just the conveyancer? Money laundering is not going away; it's got worse.
Yes.
So I think you gave me this stat, Chris, which says of 88 billion of dirty money comes through the UK each year, which is staggering. Of which property is often the primary vehicle.
Yeah.
Despite all the work we're doing, there's recent scandals. We had the scandal of the guy, Chinese online casino operator, who managed to buy nearly 80 million quid's worth of properties. And that wasn't 15 years ago. This was starting in the late 2010s, 2090s onwards. Managed to buy 5 flats in one day, So, and these are all through offshore vehicles, various different things. So it's not always simple, to your point.
Never. Yeah, hardly ever. I've seen a lot of them, and it's we used to joke that as well as being conveyancers, we're like financial auditors as well. It seems when the more complicated one comes in, and you're kind of like, well, where's he got that money from? I've never even heard of this. How am I going to get the proof of funds of that? So it seems like there's a lot more source of funds being required. As you said, the gifters, things are changing. There's more diligence around it. I read that the NCA's 2025 National Risk Assessment, which was published in July 2025, states that there is a realistic possibility that up to £10 billion could be laundered through the UK property market each year. So it really is there really is an issue, and on your point that you just said there as well. And is the industry keeping pace with this then, with these new regulations, or do you think there's still a gap between what's expected and what's being done?
So I think it's a good question. The industry probably holds the key, which is, I think conveyancers have done a vast amount of work, and you've probably heard, I do defend the conveyancing industry a great deal about the work they've done.
Same here, yeah.
And I think, yes, 2022, the LSEG guidance introduced some meaningful change. Yeah. And what we're seeing now is actually that change is starting to bleed into other sectors. So although the FCA hasn't necessarily changed its guidance as such, and the FCA, of course, regulates your mortgage broker and your lender, and then you've also got HMRC regulating your estate agents from money laundering standpoint, or anti-money laundering standpoint, I should say. I think what's being seen is conveyancing looked at good practice, and then what are we expecting other parties to do? So, I think it's fair to say that a lot of HMRC's focus on with estate agents has been really about KYC standards.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah, which is really your ID, possibly PEPs and sanctions, ongoing monitoring. But now they're starting to ask questions around source of funds, and we should be careful here. Estate agents will also use the word proof of funds.
Mm-hmm.
And the technical standard, proof of funds is really a commercial check saying Chris buys a property or wants to put an offer and he says he's got a £5,000 deposit. Well, prove you've got the 5,000 deposit. That would make Chris the better buyer than Mike, who can't prove he's got the £5,000 deposit. It's not really a money laundering check. Whereas a source of funds check is really all about the origins of the money. Where did it come from? And we're starting to see that bleed through. Now, the risk of that is if I've got conveyancer,
Yes.
lender, broker, estate agent, all ask me very similar questions, the home buying experience is going to be abysmal. You're going to be asked numerous times for similar or the same documentation. So I guess, the industry needs to figure this out, and they are exploring ways of more interoperable systems, and clearly ProConvey being a great example of that.
Yeah.
So
that's what I was going to lead into. Yeah, what you said there. So in my head, then you said if agents potentially, and we see a few of them, they're starting to do proof of funds now. Then you get to your lawyer, and not only do you get source of funds, you get source of wealth as well. You have to, do so. You can do 3 different separate checks, which are all trying to get to the same conclusion. And there is a very real possibility, just like the ID checks, you end up doing this once, twice, 3 times. So not only is it, a real pain in the backside to get all of that ready for the estate agent and to prove you've got the money, then when it gets to the lawyer, they're going to look through that and you're going to have to provide more information. So yeah, it really should be all provided up front. And I am seeing a few more agents jumping on board to do it on our system. And I think one thing that you mentioned that differentiates us is that point of when you do it on our system and it pushes through to the conveyancer, you've got them shared results. So we're really trying to stop that, duplication of data for the client, and also getting it ready up front so that when that buyer is vetted, and it goes through to the solicitors, you're not going to find out in a couple of weeks that actually they can't buy it because their source of funds isn't up to scratch. So yeah, it's definitely changing, and I agree. Yeah, I think the agents are opening their eyes a bit more. Hopefully, some of with HMRC, they can push a bit harder, and that would, I'm sure, it will speed up property transactions, which is our aim. And everyone uses the term source of funds, but as I just mentioned, I think there is a few inconsistencies around how people approach it, whether that's the agents or the lawyers. But what would you say is like best case? What does it mean to do it properly, Mike?
Yeah, well, if you think about source of funds, the first thing is really understanding the origins of the money.
Yep.
That's clearly what you're looking for. Now, how do you go about it is you've got to find out, well, if you're talking about source of funds is, what actually are the funds involved? If you think about property purchase, well, okay, you've got your deposit, and you've also got your stamp duty. Yeah, that's part of the funds involved. You'll have, the lending you're taking down. So what we first do is establish the amount of money involved in the transaction so that the party needs to knows the amount of money involved. Then we'll establish where is that money held today. So where is that money today? Within that, we'll also get some transaction data. And with that transaction data, that will help us then move to the biggest question, which is what were the origins of that fund?
Yep.
So by proving when your money is, and you give that home buyer being able to allow us to see the transactions, we can then start piecing together where did it originally come from, and then get the evidence to support what it comes, the origins of those funds. And we work with Legal Eye to sort of come up with a standard. What is the evidence which would support it? What is the best practice standard? And we have that within our journey so that home buyer can quickly understand the documentation they need to provide to support the origins of those funds.
And that is the tricky bit, isn't it? It's the hard bit isn't providing proof of funds, and saying you've got the money. That's simple, right? Yeah, it really is. Where has that money come from, and is it legitimate? And I guess that there's a different onus on the agents and the conveyancers to dig into that a little bit further, right? The agents, I suppose, proof of funds is probably enough for them. They're not qualified. They don't want to add money laundering regulations into their, trying to vet buyers. They obviously want to make that sale as quickly as possible. So they both have different obligations, and they're coming at it from different angles in the transaction, right?
Yeah, well, I'd slightly beg to differ.
Yep.
I think they all have the same obligations. They translate them differently. The rules are the same.
Yep.
Yeah. I think this is the nuance which we need to be careful around is each property party has translated those obligations in different ways. Now, because the LSAG guidance, the legal sector had a very prescriptive translation of that.
Yeah.
And whereas HMRC and the FCA has a more subjective well, not subjective, principle-based guidance, which
Right.
leaves the subjectivity up to the agent and the broker and the lender.
Right.
And it'll be interesting to see how this develops, because with the FCA taking over the regulation of all, it'll be interesting to see. So our view is, if we can work with tools like ProConvey, where we can get the best quality report out there on behalf of the home buyer, and to the extent an agent's obligations might change over time, or their translation of obligations, you can still use tools like ProConvey in order to be able to see the depth if your requirements change. And we will see how this goes. And then, of course, the point of, and then documenting your decisions, making sure that's clearly on file,
Mhm.
understanding that. And I think we also need to factor in is, under the FCA's sort of way of thinking, they're not so prescriptive on how you go about it. They're more about, was it effective?
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned this earlier, Chris. It's about the various risks of it. So Mike Ward has a job early and he saves £1,000 a month, and he's been saving for a year and he's got £10,000.
Mhm.
Pretty simple.
Yep.
Yeah. If I can
Mhm.
see the evidence, that's exactly what I expected.
Yeah.
Mike Ward moves over from a third party country, has £100,000,
Yeah.
some of it via an offshore. Very different question.
Yes. Yeah, indeed.
And I think this is where the challenge is going to come, is how do I, in banking, we used to call it swim lane. How do I swim lane different sources of funds? So I make sure that the ones which carry the most risks are most clearly interrogated, where the ones which may be exactly what they seem can move through the system quickly, not inconveniencing the home buyer.
Understood. Yeah, understood. And it is, yeah, it's quite daunting actually, because sometimes where there are cases where you feel like it might be a red flag when you're doing source of funds, it might not be. And one example I had was, I remember some lady was buying a property and the money was in a Chinese bank account, and she sent me over the bank statements to review, but they're all in Mandarin.
Yeah.
So then I had to find a notary that was, approved by the FCA to get them translated over. And then even when they come back in English, I was looking at that, I was just like, I don't know where this has come from, really. And it's not necessarily a red flag. It's just a complicated source of funds. And based on what you see across the sector at the minute, Mike, what are firms most commonly failing on with source of funds?
So typically the age-old ones is typically not going far enough. That's been around forever. I've got 3 months bank statements, that'll do.
Yeah.
I haven't really figured out. What is clearly the case, and you mentioned it earlier, is making sure that they're not done too late.
Mm-hmm.
Because source of funds can be complex.
Yeah.
So we'd encourage people to do it as early as practicable. So once you've onboarded the client, try and get that at the top of your list of things to do. Because of the pressure on chains, etc., deadlines increases. And if you find something in the source of funds which needs further investigation, quite often it can take a little bit of time to piece together the evidence you might need. Now, with tools like ours, we hope to make that less than it would be. But unlike, say, some sort of ID checks, source of funds will never be 100% in 100% of cases.
Yeah.
You gather the perfect information at that moment. There will be many times where you'll need to investigate further. And so by doing it earlier, you can do the depth of check while not pressuring timelines. And then you can take the correct actions as well. There will be cases which you shouldn't take on. Not always because the person's a money launderer, but it could be, I don't have the expertise. I'm sorry,
Yes.
but you're not a case I can work with. Apologies, there may be other firms you can, but it's just not one for us. And I think as we go forward, it is more likely, I think the firms will be more careful on making sure that they handle cases where they have true expertise and not ones they don't.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. And I think just going back to that, there was 2 examples that I remember that were exactly like that with the expertise aspect of it. One, if I remember rightly, a guy won 250,000 on an online casino, and to do the source of funds check for that, I had to have a list of all of his bets that he'd made to make sure they were legit. But he'd been betting for the last 2 years, like 5p bets, 1p bets, pound. Like, it just came through this immense spreadsheet that I had to kind of look through to make sure they were all legit, and that was one. And then obviously the one I mentioned earlier to you with the Mandarin bank source of funds bank statement. So just to give the viewers a kind of idea of like these different source of funds checks that you don't commonly come up. It's not always just wages or a gift. There are many ones. And I know Armalytix takes you through that relevant route to make sure, again, that if you are saying it's coming from that source, this is what you need to provide, and not having that back and forth with the conveyancers. And yeah, you're exactly right. The earlier, the better, because if we think about how it's done now, an agent will find a buyer. They may do proof of funds, maybe, maybe not. That goes to the solicitors. You're now getting them onboarded. Source of funds should be done immediately, as you said, but you are waiting at least a week, potentially two, to get all of this ready, only then to find out that actually you can't buy this property. So it's going to reduce fall throughs. It's going to speed up pipelines, just getting it done early. And I hope the emphasis does go on to the agents to get this done for our sake and the industry's sake, really, I think. But okay, so we've talked about what you guys are doing at Armalytix, a little bit about what ProConvey is doing, and for the viewers as well, we're very close to having Armalytix integrated into ProConvey to streamline that start of the cases. And I think that leads me into my next section, which is technology making a difference. And I think we already touched on that with the open banking a little bit, but I just wanted to hear it from yourself. Yeah, where is technology making a difference and creating that audit trail, I guess, for the conveyancers to rely on?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've mentioned this before, but I guess the key thing is, can we get you an insightful report as a conveyancer or even an agent, which contains the information and a proper record of what was collected, how it was reviewed, and what was verified, so that you can get on with the real job, which is getting that person into their home, or making sure you're not getting someone to a home who shouldn't be. So I guess it's got value for the compliance, but it reduces the overall risk for the firm in terms of if you've got a good process which collects the information you need. It's got value for the fee earner because hopefully spending less time on the simple, which could be quickly established by Armalytix, and spending more time on the things which might be a little bit more complex. But most importantly, getting on with the real work of conveying a home, and getting someone into a home, which is clearly for most people the biggest transaction they'll do in their life. So open banking was a significant step forward, but open banking, we build all our connections to the banks. So we do 98% of our open banking is through our own proprietary connections. We are regulated by the FCA as an AISP, which is called an account information service provider, which means we are under obligations around how we store, hold the data, how we process it, how we make sure that we keep users' information safe. But actually, it's broader than that. The real work was actually understanding documents as well, not just the open banking, but understanding documents, because people's finances aren't as simple as it all came into the current account. I all had an easy job, which I saved money from, and I've never moved jobs, and I've never had any other sources. Documents can be in all sorts of different forms, and we've spent a lot of time figuring out how do we turn that into a sort of digital, understandable process, and I think, and then return it to conveyancers. So I think our true value is really, can we get the large majority of a check done on behalf of our property partners in such a way that the home buyer doesn't find it overwhelming?
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what you said about 100% of the time, it's not going to be 100%. We say the same with ProConvey. There's no harm in just getting 95% ready up front for it to be reviewed to get that extra 5% right. That's kind of what we're looking at as well. So I think we've talked enough about source of funds, some examples, and what you guys are doing to solve it. I'm really interested to see, looking ahead, what should the property professionals that are listening to this right now be paying attention to? What's on the horizon that they might not be prepared for? Have you got anything?
Yeah, I think, having sat under FCA regulation for 25 years, I think people are sort of wondering what's coming over the hill. I think, and for most people, they sort of understand that it might well be a different style of regime. But I think what I would say is, what we as an industry have got to be ready for is the focus they will have on process and governance and supervision. And so when we look about what's coming, I think it will be unavoidable that the parties to the properties will need to be more coordinated with each other. Yeah. And I think, Chris, you've had a long and storied history in conveyancing. I've been surprised, being a new entry to property,
Yeah.
how little the sort of interaction between the various parties which make a property transaction
Yeah.
possible goes on.
It's siloed. Yeah.
Yeah. And that will have to change
Mhm.
because you're going to have a common regulator, at least looking over lenders, brokers, and conveyancers. Um, um, Agents, we will see how that forms. There's talk of different regulations coming to them, whether they are going to become regulated or not.
Mhm.
I'm not party to any idea what will happen. But the point is, it's unavoidable. We need to be more coordinated because of a number of reasons. Firstly, if we're all doing similar checks, that may be a good thing, yeah? 4
Mhm.
sets of eyes.
Yeah.
Great. Isn't that supposed to be great? 4 people looking for the same thing. Surely you must spot things more quickly. However, from a home buyer standpoint, it could be an absolute
Well,
disaster.
yeah, I think that's, you could still have 4 sets of eyes on it. It's just making sure the client only has to do it once. You can all still review that information. Yeah, I think that's the.
That's right. And
Mm.
whereas historically we haven't been good as industry
No.
of working, we all have separate systems,
Yep.
you know, and so, this is why we're so excited by firms like ProConvey, because you're actually aiming to break down these silos,
Yeah.
increase coordination between the agent and the conveyancer, and try and make the user do the information once and early,
Mhm.
and allow any problems to be identified earlier, which
Yeah.
which solves many problems. It's not purely money laundering, interestingly enough. 30% of transactions fail. Now,
Yeah.
for a lender, that means it's incredibly expensive. They've gone all the way through to offer, all the way, and then the property fails.
Yep.
It's a terrible result for not only the home buyer, but it's a terrible result for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, agent,
Mhm.
broker, lender, and conveyancer.
Mhm.
So it's in no one's interest to have these things fails. And if it is going to fail, it probably should fail earlier. Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah. So if it is going to fail, I think the government came out with that £400 million a year of wasted fees on failed transactions. That's no good for the UK consumer. Um,
Yeah.
so I think in my mind, there will be some challenges. It'll be different. Yeah. Uh, FCA will be much more about outcomes. So it'll be about, okay, you had this information. What
Right.
was low risk? How did you spend your time in the high risk? And
Mhm.
and when it was high risk, what got you comfortable to move forward? What level of supervision happened for that to move forward?
Yeah.
Um, and seems that my VC agreed with me with a big thumbs up.
Yeah.
What level of supervision went off? What senior management signed off on that?
Mhm.
And so, and in banks, that's quite a familiar place. I think the other question will be centralized onboarding or not. So, how an FCA firm would look at things is saying, well, you would never get the person earning the fee to onboard the client.
Mhm.
And the reason is they would look at it as an inherent conflict. Mike Ward takes on Chris the billionaire, and I'm the banker. Mike Ward does the onboarding. Well, I'm hugely incentivized to onboard Chris.
Yeah.
He's going to
Okay.
pay lots of fees and all these things. Um, and so I haven't heard anything concrete on this other than how other FCA regulated firms do it. You might find more centralized onboarding teams.
Mhm.
The reason being to avoid that conflict that if there's a large fee, you don't want the person receiving the fee also to be the person in control of whether that client comes on board or not. So that's a rather long-winded answer.
No, understood. Yeah, I completely understand. I think I was thinking about your comments around the shared platforms and that there doesn't seem to be any um, shared platforms at the minute in the industry, and if there is, they don't seem to offer real value. I think that was something we tried to build at ProConvey. It's not only about having visibility from the agent, from the seller, from the broker. That's not enough. It's about making sure that you're all getting value on the platform, whether that's being able, less sales chasing, getting information that you wouldn't necessarily get, or you'd have to duplicate it. So yeah, it's really, I think the industry is going that way. I think they've tried it before. There was the chain matrix with the there's been many others. I think the tide is definitely turning at the moment with these platforms. But Mike, thank you very much. That's been genuinely useful. It's been practical, grounded. I've learned a little bit myself. And yeah, I hope that's what the audience want to hear. Obviously, if anyone needs to reach out to Mike for any further questions, you can check Armalytix out on the website. And as I mentioned, ProConvey will be integrating with Armalytix very soon. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining us on Linking the Chain. And is there anything you'd like to say to sign off?
Well, no, thanks, Chris. I'm really supportive of tools like yours. ProConvey seems to be a really interesting piece of technology, which is gaining real traction and great. I mean, it's going to be really good for the industry.
Yeah.
So we're really happy to support and work with ProConvey.
I appreciate it and looking forward to working with you, Mike. Thank you very much.